In the distant days of history, when the world was still young and humanity believed it could shape its own destiny, life moved forward with an appearance of calm. The sun rose each morning, light spread across fields and hills, people built homes, raised children, celebrated gatherings, and spoke of the future as though everything would continue just as it always had. Yet beneath that peaceful surface, something unseen was quietly breaking, not in the earth or the sky, but within the human heart. What was once sacred slowly lost its weight, reverence gave way to pride, and the voice of conscience was drowned out by desire and violence. Humanity did not lack knowledge nor strength, but it lacked the humility to recognize how far it had drifted from what was right. Relationships were shaped by advantage rather than trust, power was used to dominate rather than protect, and life itself, the most precious gift, was treated lightly in daily choices. Evil did not always appear openly or dramatically, but slipped into ordinary decisions, repeated again and again until it felt normal. The world did not collapse in a single violent moment, it slowly descended into darkness through long-standing indifference. Through all of this, God remained present, watching with deep patience. He was not quick to judge, for he saw what humanity could not, that the greatest damage was not in actions alone, but in hearts that had grown hard. When people no longer listened, no longer paused to ask who they were becoming, even the clearest warnings lost their meaning. And within this drifting world, there walked one man who moved to a different rhythm, slower, deeper, and far more quietly. His name was Noah. Noah was not remarkable by appearance, nor known as a leader or a man of great influence. He lived among his people, worked with his hands, cared for his family, and carried the same everyday concerns as those around him. What set him apart was not his circumstances, but how he responded to the world he lived in. While others chased what lay immediately before them, Noah learned to look beyond it. While others sought quick satisfaction, he chose lasting faithfulness. And while many filled the emptiness within with noise and conflict, Noah turned towards silence, where he could listen. Noah's faith was not something proclaimed loudly or displayed for admiration. It was shaped in private moments, sustained through unnoticed choices, and tested across years without visible reward. He did not withdraw from the world, yet he refused to be carried away by its current. Where others compromised values for gain, Noah held firmly to what was right, even when it left him standing alone. In the quiet of evening, as the sunlight softened and shadows stretched across the land, Noah often paused to observe the world around him. He saw children growing without guidance, families breaking under the weight of selfishness, and communities slowly accepting violence as unavoidable. These sights did not fill him with pride, but with a quiet sorrow. For he understood that the world needed more than surface change. It needed a turning of the heart. It was in these still moments, when the noise of daily life faded, that Noah sensed the presence of God most clearly, not through signs in the sky, but through a gentle and steady urging within his spirit, a reminder that faithfulness, even when unseen, still mattered. God did not seek perfection in Noah, but a heart willing to walk with him, even when no one else chose that path. Time continued to pass, and the world carried on as though nothing were wrong. People built, planned, and spoke confidently of tomorrow, believing it would resemble today, or perhaps improve upon it. Yet beneath the surface of history, a preparation was quietly unfolding. Not through force or power, but through a growing bond between God and a man who knew how to listen. These years held no great events, no public warnings, yet they were heavy with meaning, for it was in waiting that faith was refined and strengthened. Noah did not know what the future held, nor that his life would become a boundary between two ages. He knew only that each faithful day placed his trust where it belonged. When others mocked his quiet obedience, he did not respond, understanding that some truths are revealed only by time. Faithfulness did not bring him recognition, but it brought him a deep and steady peace, one not dependent on outward circumstances. And as the world continued to drift, unaware that it was nearing an irreversible turning point, the story of the Great Flood was being woven from threads almost invisible: the patience of God and the faithfulness of an ordinary man. No rain had yet fallen, no ark had been built, and the sky still held its familiar blue. But within the unseen order of a divine plan, change had already begun.
This opening chapter ends here, in stillness and waiting, like the final quiet breath before something immense is revealed, not through fear or noise, but through truth. As night settles and the concerns of the day grow distant, this story invites the listener to slow down, to rest, and to enter the gentle rhythm of an ancient history, where quiet faith begins to open the way toward the end of an old world and the hope of a new beginning. As the days continued to pass, the world settled even more deeply into its familiar rhythm, unaware that it was standing on the edge of profound change. Morning followed morning, and night followed night, each one much like the last, creating the comforting illusion that nothing could truly disturb the order humanity had built for itself. People woke to their routines, went about their work, exchanged words filled with confidence about tomorrow, and lay down each evening believing the world would greet them again unchanged. Yet beneath this steady pattern, the foundations of human life were slowly eroding. Communities grew larger, but hearts grew more distant. Trust, once the thread that held people together, became fragile and easily broken. Strength was admired more than kindness, and cleverness more than wisdom. Many learned how to gain advantage, but few cared to ask whether the path they followed was leading anywhere worth reaching. Violence did not always erupt openly. Often it lingered quietly in attitudes, in unchecked anger, in the willingness to harm others for personal gain. Over time, these choices reshaped the culture of the world until cruelty no longer shocked and compassion was viewed as weakness. The land itself bore witness to this change. Fields were still cultivated, animals still roamed, and rivers still flowed. But the harmony between humanity and creation had been disturbed. What was meant to be cared for was often exploited. What was meant to give life was used without restraint. The earth continued to provide, patient and silent, even as it absorbed the consequences of human disregard. Creation groaned beneath the weight of imbalance, though few paused long enough to notice. In the midst of this growing disorder, Noah lived among his people, seeing clearly what others chose to ignore. He observed how easily anger spread, how quickly lies replaced truth, and how rarely anyone stopped to reflect on the direction their lives were taking. Yet Noah did not isolate himself in bitterness. He carried a quiet awareness that the world he knew was drifting far from the purpose it had been created for, and that such drifting could not continue forever without consequence. Noah's grief was not loud, nor was it marked by despair. Instead, it rested deep within him, shaping the way he prayed, the way he worked, and the way he interacted with others. He understood that brokenness did not begin with actions alone, but with hearts that had forgotten how to listen. While many dismissed the idea of accountability before God, Noah held on to the belief that every life, every choice still mattered. This conviction set him apart, not as a judge of others, but as a witness to a forgotten truth. God saw what Noah saw, but with a clarity that reached far beyond human understanding. He saw that violence had filled the earth, not only in acts of harm, but in the spirit with which people lived.
He saw how goodness was being crowded out, how the image he had placed within humanity was being distorted. And though his patience was great, he also knew that unchecked corruption would ultimately destroy the very life he had given. What was unfolding was not merely a moral decline, but a threat to the future of creation itself. Still, God did not act hastily. Judgment was not his desire, restoration was. Yet restoration required a breaking away from what had become deeply rooted. In his wisdom, God prepared a way forward, one that would both confront the depth of human failure and preserve the possibility of new life. This plan was not revealed to the world at large, but entrusted first to the one man who had proven faithful in the quiet, unseen places of life. Noah continued his days unaware of the full shape of what was to come, yet increasingly aware that he was being drawn into something greater than himself. The world around him seemed louder, more restless, more consumed by its own pursuits, while his own path felt narrower and more deliberate. It was as though two directions were forming at once, one racing forward without reflection, and the other slowing down, preparing to carry the weight of what lay ahead.
As nights fell and silence returned, Noah often felt the distance between himself and the world more sharply. But within that distance, he also sensed purpose. Though the earth was filled with corruption, it was not abandoned. Though humanity had strayed, it was not beyond hope. The story was not ending yet. It was being reshaped. And while the world slept, confident in its own strength, the stage was quietly being set for a moment that would change everything. This was the world before the flood, full of activity, rich in noise, and poor in reflection. A world continuing forward, unaware that time itself was bending toward a decisive moment. And within that world, one man walked steadily, unknowingly carrying the future of life upon his faithfulness, as the voice of God prepared to speak more clearly than it ever had before. The days that followed unfolded quietly, much like the days before, yet something within Noah had begun to shift. Nothing in the outward world had changed. The same voices filled the air, the same routines marked the passing of time, and the same confidence shaped the plans of those around him. Yet beneath the surface of ordinary life, Noah sensed a growing stillness, as though the noise of the world was slowly receding to make room for something deeper. It was not fear that settled over him, but awareness, a gentle, persistent knowing that the path ahead would not remain as it was. In the quiet hours, when the light softened and the land seemed to exhale, Noah felt drawn inward. His prayers grew longer, not because he had more words to speak, but because he learned to wait. He discovered that listening required patience, and patience required trust. In that waiting, the presence of God became more tangible, not as a sudden interruption, but as a steady nearness that shaped his thoughts and steadied his heart. Then, in a moment that felt both unexpected and strangely familiar, God spoke. It was not a voice that echoed through the sky, nor a sound that startled the earth beneath Noah's feet. It came with clarity rather than volume, with weight rather than force. Noah recognized it not because it was loud, but because it carried truth that settled deeply within him. God spoke of the world as it truly was, not as humanity saw it, but as it had become. Violence had filled the earth. Corruption had spread into every corner of human life. What was meant to flourish in harmony was unraveling under the weight of unchecked desire. As Noah listened, the gravity of God's words unfolded slowly. This was not a declaration born of anger, but of sorrow. God revealed that the world, left to continue on its present course, would consume itself. The corruption that had taken root would not remain contained, it would destroy the very life it fed upon. Yet even in this revelation, there was mercy. God spoke not only of what must end, but of what could be preserved. Noah felt the weight of the calling settle upon him. He understood that he was being entrusted with something far beyond his own life. God revealed a plan, measured, intentional, and precise. There would be a cleansing of the earth, a great flood that would wash away what had become irreversibly broken. But life would not be lost entirely. God would preserve a remnant, a beginning from which the world could be renewed. As the meaning of these words sank in, Noah felt the tension rise within his own heart. He was not shielded from doubt, nor spared from the awareness of his own limitations. He knew the world he lived in, the skepticism of its people, and the enormity of what was being asked of him. To carry such knowledge alone felt heavy, almost unbearable. Yet beneath the weight, there was also a quiet assurance. God was not asking Noah to understand everything, only to trust and obey. The calling did not demand haste. God did not urge Noah to act in fear or urgency. Instead, he spoke with patience, as though allowing time for the truth to take root. Noah was invited into a partnership shaped by obedience rather than control. The future was not laid out in full detail, but the next step was clear enough to require faith. When the moment passed and the familiar sounds of the world returned, Noah remained still. He did not rush to speak of what he had heard, nor did he attempt to explain it away. He carried the calling quietly, holding it with reverence and caution. Life around him continued unchanged, yet he knew that everything had shifted. The world moved forward unaware, while Noah stood at the threshold of a path that would soon separate him from all he had known. That night, as darkness settled and the land grew silent, Noah lay awake longer than usual. His thoughts were not filled with panic, but with contemplation. He understood that obedience would require endurance, humility, and unwavering trust. He also understood that the calling he had received was not about destruction alone, but about preservation, hope, and the faithfulness of God even in the face of human failure. The voice had spoken, the calling had been given, and though no visible sign yet marked the change, the course of history had quietly turned. After the calling had been given, life did not suddenly change its outward shape. The same mornings arrived with familiar light, and the same evenings settled gently over the land. Yet for Noah, every ordinary moment now carried a deeper weight. What he had heard could not be forgotten, nor could it be hurried. It rested within him, steady and demanding patience, waiting for the moment when obedience would move from the unseen to the visible. In time, God spoke again, not to overwhelm Noah with urgency, but to guide him with clarity. The instruction was precise, measured, and deliberate. Noah was told to build an ark, not as a symbol or a gesture, but as a vessel of preservation. It would not be small, nor temporary. It would be large enough to carry life through what was coming, strong enough to endure long days upon rising waters, and carefully designed to fulfill its purpose. God described the ark in detail. Its length, its width, and its height were given with intention. It would have multiple levels, each serving its role, and a single door through which life would enter. A window would be placed above, allowing light to find its way into the darkness within. Nothing about the design was random. Each instruction reflected order in the midst of what would soon become chaos, a reminder that even judgment was governed by purpose, not impulse. As Noah listened, the scale of what he was being asked to do became clear. This was not a task that could be completed quietly in the background. It would require years of labor, unwavering commitment, and a willingness to stand apart from everyone around him. He understood that the ark would raise questions long before it ever served its purpose. People would see it taking shape,
piece by piece and wonder why such a structure was being built on dry ground beneath open skies. Noah felt the weight of that reality settle in his heart. He imagined the looks of confusion, the laughter, the dismissal. He knew how easily obedience could be mistaken for foolishness when its reason was not yet revealed. Yet even as these thoughts passed through his mind, he felt no confusion about what he must do. God had not asked him to convince the world, only to obey. There was no negotiation in the command, but neither was there harshness. God did not pressure Noah with fear of what would happen if he failed. Instead, the instruction was given with trust, as though God knew Noah's answer before it was ever spoken. The task ahead was immense, but it was not given to Noah because he was strong. It was given because he was faithful. For a time, Noah said nothing. He carried the command quietly, allowing it to shape his resolve. He did not rush to gather others or seek validation for what he had been told. Obedience, he understood, often begins in silence. It begins when a person decides to act without applause, without certainty of outcome, and without the comfort of shared understanding. At last, the moment came when inward conviction became outward movement. Noah gathered what he needed and chose the place where the ark would stand. There was no ceremony, no announcement, only the steady beginning of work. Each measured cut of wood, each deliberate placement, was an act of trust made visible. With every step, Noah aligned himself not with the expectations of his world, but with the word he had received. The ark did not rise quickly. Its beginnings were humble, almost unimpressive to those who passed by. Yet in those first actions, something profound had already occurred. Obedience had crossed the threshold from intention into reality. The future had begun to take shape, not through force or spectacle, but through quiet, persistent faith. And as Noah worked beneath the open sky, while the world continued on in its certainty, the foundations of preservation were being laid, slowly, faithfully, and without turning back. The ark did not rise in a single season, nor did it take shape in a way that demanded immediate attention. Its progress was slow, measured by years rather than days, by repetition rather than dramatic moments. Each morning, Noah returned to the same work. The sound of tools striking wood became a steady rhythm in his life, marking time more faithfully than words ever could. What God had spoken long ago was now being carried forward through patience, through endurance, through the quiet discipline of showing up again and again.
As the years passed, the structure grew larger, its outline becoming impossible to ignore. At first, people noticed only in passing. Curiosity flickered briefly, then faded. But as the ark continued to rise, questions began to surface. Why build such a massive vessel where no water gathered? Why devote a lifetime to something that seemed so unnecessary, so disconnected from reality as everyone else understood it? Some came close, their expressions filled with confusion. Others laughed openly, confident in their own understanding of the world. They spoke of seasons that had always followed one another without fail, of skies that had never betrayed the earth beneath them. To them, Noah's labor appeared misguided, even foolish. The certainty of the present blinded them to the possibility of change. Noah heard the voices, though he rarely answered them. He did not argue, nor did he attempt to persuade. His obedience was not fueled by the need to be understood. It was rooted in trust, trust that what God had spoken was true, even if it could not yet be proven. Each unanswered question, each moment of ridicule became another opportunity to remain faithful without recognition. There were days when exhaustion settled deeply into his bones. The work was heavy, and the years stretched long. Noah felt the weight of isolation, the distance between himself and those who once shared his routines. Yet even in weariness, he found strength in consistency. Faith did not always feel powerful. Often it felt like persistence, choosing to continue when stopping would have been easier. The ark became a silent witness. Its massive frame stood against the sky, growing steadily, a presence that disrupted the familiar landscape. Children grew into adults while it was being built. Conversations changed, but the ark remained. It stood as a reminder that someone among them was living for a future they could not yet imagine. Seasons came and went. Heat and cold, calm and storm, all passed over the land, and still the ark endured its slow becoming. Noah learned that obedience is rarely dramatic. More often, it is repetitive and unseen, tested not by crisis, but by time. What mattered was not how quickly the work advanced, but that it never ceased. Gradually, the ark reached a point where its purpose could no longer be dismissed as a strange project. Its scale demanded attention. It no longer looked temporary. It looked intentional. Though many still mocked, a quiet unease began to settle among some. Questions lingered in the silence they left unspoken. And through it all, Noah remained steady. He did not measure success by approval or failure by rejection. He measured it by faithfulness, by whether he continued to do what he had been asked, one day at a time. The ark was nearing completion, and with it, the long season of waiting was drawing closer to its end. What had begun as a calling whispered in stillness had now become a visible testament of trust. The world continued as before, unaware of how close it stood to change. Yet the vessel of preservation stood ready, shaped by years of quiet obedience, waiting for the moment when preparation would give way to fulfillment. When the ark stood complete, its vast form resting silently beneath the open sky, a change settled over the land. It was not a change that could be seen immediately, but one that could be felt, a quiet shift, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Noah sensed it before any sign appeared. The long season of preparation had reached its threshold. What had been built in patience was now about to be filled with purpose. God spoke once more, gently but unmistakably. The time had come. Noah was told to enter the ark with his family, not in haste, but with readiness. Alongside them, the animals would come, each according to its kind, male and female, called not by human command, but by divine order. Life itself was being gathered, drawn toward preservation by a will far greater than instinct. Then, in a way that defied explanation, they began to arrive. From distant fields and quiet forests, creatures moved with calm determination. They did not rush, nor did they resist. Large and small, familiar and unseen, they came in pairs, guided by something deeper than fear. Their movement was steady, almost reverent, as though creation itself recognized the moment. The ark, once empty and silent, slowly filled with the sound of life, footsteps, breathing, quiet calls echoing within its wooden walls. Those who watched could no longer dismiss what they saw. Curiosity turned to uncertainty. Laughter faded. Some stood in silence, unsettled by the order unfolding before them. Others chose to look away, clinging to the comfort of what they had always known. The sky remained clear, the ground was still dry, and yet something irreversible was clearly taking place. Noah did not speak to the crowds. His focus remained on obedience, on ensuring that each life entrusted to him found its place within the ark. There was no triumph in his expression, no sense of being proven right, only solemn responsibility. Each step taken up the ark's entrance carried both gratitude and sorrow. Gratitude for the mercy being shown, and sorrow for the world that had chosen not to listen. At last, when all had entered as God commanded, a profound stillness settled. The animals were inside. Noah's family stood together. Outside, the world waited, unaware that this pause was the final one. Then, without human hands, the door of the ark was closed. The sound was not loud, yet it carried finality. What had been open was now sealed. What had been offered was now complete. Inside the ark, light filtered softly through the window above. Noah stood in silence, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. There was no fear in his heart, but there was awe. He knew that once the rain began, there would be no turning back. The waiting was over. The moment of fulfillment had arrived. Outside, the air remained still. No thunder sounded, no wind yet stirred. But high above, unseen clouds were beginning to gather. The first drops had not yet fallen, but the world had already crossed the line between what had been and what would never be again. The ark rested quietly. Life was secured within, and the earth stood on the edge of cleansing. For a moment, nothing happened. The ark remained still, resting on dry ground, surrounded by a world that looked exactly as it always had. Inside, the air was quiet. Breathing could be heard. Wood creaked softly as it settled under its own weight. Noah stood without speaking, aware that this pause was not an absence of action, but the final breath before change. Then the rain began. At first it was gentle, so light it could have been mistaken for nothing more than passing weather. Small drops touched the earth, darkening the dust, leaving faint marks that disappeared almost as quickly as they appeared. Outside, some noticed, others did not. Rain had come before. There was nothing yet to fear. But the rain did not stop. Hour by hour, it grew steadier. The sky dimmed, clouds thickening until light softened into gray. The sound of water striking the ark became constant, a quiet but persistent rhythm. Inside, the animals shifted, sensing movement not yet seen. Noah remained calm. He remembered the words he had been given long ago. This was not chaos. This was fulfillment. Then something changed beneath the ground. Water began to rise from places long unseen. Springs broke open. The earth, once firm and reliable, released what it had held back for generations. Streams overflowed. Rivers expanded beyond their boundaries. What had always been contained was no longer restrained. Outside the ark, certainty began to crumble. Those who had laughed now watched in confusion. Those who had ignored now paid attention. The rain intensified, no longer gentle, no longer familiar. It fell with weight and persistence, soaking everything it touched. The ground softened, paths disappeared, the horizon blurred beneath sheets of water. Inside the ark, Noah felt the shift before he saw it. A subtle movement passed through the structure, a quiet lifting, barely perceptible. The ark groaned as it loosened from the earth that had held it. Slowly, almost tenderly, it began to rise. What had once been firmly grounded was now carried by unseen currents.
Fear did not fill the ark. There was solemnity, there was awareness, there was deep silence, broken only by rain and the sounds of life sheltered within wooden walls. Noah understood that this was not merely destruction unfolding outside. It was separation, the dividing of what could be preserved from what could not continue. The water continued to rise. Hills disappeared. Familiar landmarks vanished beneath restless waves. The world outside became unrecognizable, reshaped by forces no human strength could resist. Cries were swallowed by wind and rain. Efforts to escape met only deeper water. The certainty that had once defined daily life dissolved into urgency too late understood. Inside, the ark floated steadily. Noah's trust was tested not by danger within, but by the knowledge of what was being lost beyond the walls. He did not celebrate survival. He grieved silently, holding both sorrow and faith in the same breath. He knew that judgment had come not without warning and not without mercy. Day after day the rain fell. The sound became endless, blurring time itself. Night and day lost distinction beneath heavy clouds. The ark drifted, guided not by human hands, but by divine care. Though surrounded by overwhelming waters, what was inside remained secure. The earth was being washed clean, and as the ark moved upon the face of the deep, carrying life through the storm, the old world faded beneath the flood, making room, though unseen, for the promise of a new beginning yet to come. The rain continued far beyond what anyone could have imagined. It did not fall in anger, nor did it rush toward an end. It simply remained, steady, unrelenting, washing the earth layer by layer. Day after day, water rose higher, covering fields, swallowing valleys, and finally reaching the tops of the hills that once seemed untouchable. What had been solid and permanent vanished beneath a moving surface until only water and sky remained. Inside the ark, time lost its familiar shape. 40 days passed as rain poured from above, and the deep continued to release what it had long held back. The sound of water became the constant background of life, a low, endless presence that filled every pause. Noah no longer counted the days by sunlight or shadow, for the sky offered neither. Instead, time was measured by routine, by care, by the steady rhythm of life preserved. The ark floated freely now, no longer remembering the feel of land beneath it. It rose and fell gently with the movement of the waters, carried wherever the currents led. There was no steering, no control, only surrender. What had once seemed frightening now became familiar. Trust replaced resistance.
Life inside the ark settled into quiet order. The animals rested, fed, and moved within their spaces. Sounds echoed softly through the wooden chambers, breathing, shifting, the occasional call, but there was no panic. The ark held them all, as it had been designed to do. What once felt crowded slowly transformed into community, each life sharing the same shelter, the same waiting. Noah often stood beneath the window above, where faint light filtered through. He could not see far, only water stretching endlessly in every direction. Mountains were gone, horizons were erased. The world he had known no longer existed. In its place was something formless, silent, and humbling. The waiting tested him more deeply than the storm ever had. Obedience had once required action. Now it required patience. There were no new instructions, no signs to interpret, only the call to remain faithful without knowing when the waiting would end. Days became weeks, weeks became months. The ark continued to drift, suspended between what had been destroyed and what had not yet appeared. Yet even in the stillness, God was at work. The waters, though vast, were not endless. Their rise had a limit. What had been released would, in time, be gathered back. Beneath the surface, unseen changes were already taking place. The earth was being reshaped, prepared quietly for renewal. Inside the ark, faith matured. It no longer leaned on urgency or fear. It rested in trust. Noah learned that salvation is not only found in escape from danger, but also in endurance, remaining where God has placed you, even when movement feels impossible. The ark was no longer just a vessel of survival, it had become a place of transformation. Then, after many days had passed, something changed. The sound of rain softened, the endless rhythm weakened, and finally it stopped. The silence that followed was profound. Water still surrounded the ark, stretching beyond sight, but the sky no longer poured itself out. Noah stood quietly, sensing what words had not yet confirmed. The waiting was not over, but a turning point had been reached. The storm had fulfilled its purpose, the flood had done its work, and though the earth was still hidden beneath the waters, the path toward a new beginning had quietly begun.
After the rain finally ceased, a deep and unfamiliar silence settled over the world. It was not the silence of fear, but the stillness that follows completion. The ark continued to float upon waters that no longer surged with force, moving gently as though the earth itself were breathing again. Though nothing appeared to change at once, something unseen had already begun, for God had remembered Noah and all that were with him. Slowly, almost beyond perception, the waters began to withdraw. There was no sudden draining and no dramatic reversal. Day after day, the depth lessened, the currents softened, and the restless movement gave way to calm. Noah sensed the change before his eyes could confirm it. The ark no longer drifted freely. Its motion grew restrained, as if something solid were rising beneath it. Then, one quiet moment, the ark came to rest. There was no sound of impact, no violent jolt. It simply settled, no longer floating, but firmly anchored. Though water still surrounded them, Noah understood that wandering had ended. The ark had come to rest upon the mountains of Ararat, and with that resting came a subtle shift in the journey itself. In time, distant peaks began to emerge from the waters. At first, they appeared only as dark shapes against the horizon, but as the days passed, they rose more clearly into view. The world was reshaping itself, revealing new contours where the old had been washed away. Yet Noah did not rush. He had learned that resting was not the same as arriving. When he opened the window of the ark, fresh air flowed inside, carrying the scent of water, stone, and renewal. He released a raven, watching it disappear into the open sky, circling endlessly above the waters. Later he sent out a dove, but it found no place to rest and returned gently to his hand. After 7 days had passed, Noah sent the dove again. This time, it returned with a small olive leaf in its beak. The sign was fragile, yet unmistakable. Life had begun to return. The earth was healing. Still, Noah waited. Another 7 days passed, and when the dove was released once more, it did not return at all. At last, Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked out upon the ground beneath open sky. The earth lay quiet, cleansed, and new, yet even then he did not step forward. He waited for God's word. For Noah had learned that true obedience does not end when danger passes. It listens until the new beginning is fully spoken.
When the time had fully come, God spoke to Noah once more, not with urgency or warning, but with release. The long season of waiting had reached its end. The ark, which had been a place of preservation, was no longer meant to hold life inside. It was time to step forward, to leave the shelter that had carried them through judgment, and to enter the world that had been made new. Noah opened the door of the ark, and light poured in freely for the first time in many months. Fresh air filled the space, carrying the quiet promise of beginnings. One by one, Noah and his family stepped out, followed by the animals, each according to its kind. Their movements were unhurried. There was no fear in their steps, only reverence. The earth beneath their feet felt firm, steady, and unfamiliar, as though it were meeting life again for the first time.
The land was silent. No cities stood. No voices echoed across the fields. What lay before them was open, cleansed, and waiting. Noah looked upon the world and understood the weight of the moment. Survival alone was not the purpose of what had taken place. Life had been spared so that it could begin again with intention. The first thing Noah did was not to build a home or to claim the land. He built an altar. From gratitude rather than obligation, he offered what he had to God, acknowledging that every breath he now took rested on mercy. The offering rose quietly into the open sky, and it was received not as a ritual, but as a response of trust and humility.
God spoke again, and this time his words carried a promise. He blessed Noah and his family, commanding them to be fruitful and to fill the earth once more. Life was entrusted back into human hands, not without boundaries, but with care. God made it clear that the world would continue under his watch, that order would remain, and that seasons would follow one another as long as the earth endured. Then God established a covenant, not only with Noah, but with every living creature. He promised that never again would all life be destroyed by a flood. As a sign of that promise, he set a rainbow in the clouds, a quiet and beautiful reminder placed where heaven and earth meet. It was not a symbol of fear, but of remembrance, a visible assurance that judgment would not have the final word. Noah stood beneath that sign, understanding that the future would still hold struggle and imperfection. Yet it would also hold hope. The world had been washed, not to erase humanity, but to preserve the possibility of goodness. The flood was over. The waiting was complete. And before him stretched a new chapter of history, shaped by grace, responsibility, and the enduring faithfulness of God. As the story of Noah draws to a close, what remains is not the sound of rain or the image of rising waters, but a quiet sense of stillness. The flood has passed, the ark has served its purpose, and the world, though changed forever, rests beneath an open sky once more. This is not the end of struggle, nor the beginning of perfection, but it is the moment when hope is allowed to breathe again. Noah's journey reminds us that faith is rarely dramatic in the way people expect. It is built slowly, through years of obedience that often feel unnoticed and unrewarded. Long before the rain fell, faith had already been proven in silence, in patience, and in trust without visible evidence. The ark was not just a vessel of wood, but a testimony shaped by daily commitment to what was right, even when it made no sense to the world. The flood itself teaches a difficult truth, that cleansing sometimes comes through loss, and renewal often requires letting go of what can no longer stand. Yet judgment was never the final word. Mercy was. Mercy was. God did not abandon creation, but protected the seed of its future. Even in the midst of overwhelming waters, life was carried safely forward. For those who listen to this story in the quiet hours of night, there is comfort in knowing that waiting is not wasted time. Noah waited through preparation, through rain, through endless drifting, and even after land appeared. Each season of waiting had meaning. Each pause was part of the journey, and so it is with us. When answers feel delayed and the path feels unclear, faith continues to work beneath the surface. The rainbow that followed the flood stands as a gentle reminder that darkness does not cancel promise. It stretches across the sky without force, without noise, simply present. It reminds us that God remembers, that He remains faithful, that after every storm there is space for new beginnings. As you rest now, let this story settle quietly within you. Let go of what weighs heavy. Trust the unseen work taking place in your own life. Just as the waters receded in time, so too will seasons of difficulty pass. And like Noah stepping onto new ground, you will be carried forward, not by fear, but by grace. Rest in that assurance. The storm is not forever. and hope, patiently preserved, will always find its way back into the light.